Hi, Harvey.
Hi, Barb.
We're getting your thunderstorm.
Hey, stop calling it my thunderstorm.
You said it was yours first.
I said it was here first.
It just comes right down the valley from Grand Falls.
Pretty much, but it's gonna go fast.
Yeah, it's down Bristol, Florenceville now.
Yeah, it passed by pretty quick.
Did it? Okay.
Sun shining in Prescott.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Harvey, do we know how many are registered for this?
I think there were 48 last time I looked.
Very good.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
Hi, Cheryl.
Earl.
Hi.
I'm looking at a double rainbow.
Oh,
With
Kathy,
lightning.
I had a single one last night.
Every night seems to have a rainbow lately.
Well,
It's lovely.
very nice. I don't hear any more thunder, so maybe it's gone downriver farther.
It's moving down, I think. Can you
Good.
tell how much I enjoy them?
Oh no, the clock. Okay.
Hello, Lorianne, welcome. We'll give it another few minutes. We've got about a little over half our participants so far. at
How long,
registry.
Harvey? 2 minutes?
Yeah, another 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Rambha.
Hello,
Can you
Hello.
hear me?
we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Kathy, your thunder just rolled down the valley. It's here now.
Oh, is it?
No, it's still here too, Rita.
I left the other meeting early because I wanted to turn my internet off. I haven't had great luck with lightning in this house.
Oh,
So, Lorianne, I'm going to be your tech person, which really shouldn't give you that much comfort. But I'll do my best.
Not to worry. I'm pretty low maintenance, so.
That's good. I'm happy to hear that.
Though it was funny at the, well, as much as the beginning of a pandemic can be funny, because I was the one who set up all the Zoom calls for my family, and we had it every week, every Sunday. And I honestly, I think for 3 weeks in a row, Uncle Tom, lift your screen. Uncle Tom, I can see your nose. Joni, pull it down. No, why can I see the ceiling? To the left, the 3 dots to the left. Yeah, so it was, I'm sure I'm not the only one who had those wonderful family forehead Zoom calls.
Well,
No, they were good. And I think that the favorite certainly was when there was one of my coaching clients was over in the UK, and she was a sustainable farmer. And then she got this brilliant idea about renting out her goats. So we actually had a Zoom bomb of some of the goats on her farm. It was hilarious. So,
well, I'd say our Rotary Club learned really fast, Barb.
That's right.
yeah, that's what resilience looks like.
That's right. And
That's
we've done
exact-
very well with our Zoom meetings. So
Awesome.
Mhm.
Some would say that Zoom is a 4-letter word.
For sure.
Well, it's almost 5 after. We've got about 14 people who haven't joined yet, but maybe we should get started. Do you want to get started, Barb?
okay.
We'll do a few little housekeeping things that everybody says before a Zoom call. Make sure that you're muted. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I think probably the best thing is to leave questions for the end. And we'll see how well we can pull this off, right, Barb?
Well, you're the techie person, so thank you very much, Harvey. Okay, I'm going to ring the bell, so nobody jump. So that's our 70-year-old Florenceville Rotary bell that we open every meeting with. We are just finishing up with a thunderstorm here in Bath, Bristol, Florenceville area. So hopefully we won't lose anybody because of power outages or problems. And it's moving down Woodstock way, if anybody's on from Woodstock. So good evening and welcome to Moving Forward with Rotary's focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Barb O'Donnell, and I'm the current president of the Florenceville Rotary Club. And it is a privilege to be hosting this evening's event. And I bring greetings from all our members from Centerville, Florenceville, Bristol, and Bath areas. And I just wanted to mention, and speaking about DEI, that our Florenceville Rotary Club has nearly half female membership. So we're very proud of that. As you may know, Florenceville, Bristol is called the French fry capital of the world, and that those fries are made in McCain's at Florenceville. McCain's brings into our area professionals from all over the world. And our plan a year and a half ago, was to start making connections through the Multicultural Association to build partnerships and of course, sit down and share food. And then COVID hit. So our plan was delayed for a bit, but we hope to move forward in the fall with this project. And Harvey, I had you slotted in here to say, I was going to ask you to make any comments. We used to call that housekeeping, but what do you call it on a Zoom call? Doesn't have a name?
Housekeeping.
Housekeeping? Okay. Thanks, Harvey, for being the techie person. And he'll be looking after the questions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Lori Ann Jones. Lori Ann is the president and CEO of Shift Strategies Challenge Consulting. She has over 20 years of experience in working with clients and companies within the private, public, and nonprofit sectors to solve complex problems, build relationships, and team resilience. Lori Ann is a member of the Halifax Harbor Rotary Club and is the incoming VP. She is also the coordinator of District 7820's Systemic Racism Task Force, as well as Rotary Zone 28 DEI Resource Chair. Welcome, Lori Ann.
I always sort of shrink a little bit when folks read that. I'm like, that's a lot. You feel uncomfortable when the profile is on you. I think if folks don't mind, this is going to be a focused conversation around the toolkit that the task force actually developed, because I feel it's a good starting point around perhaps a tactical example of how we can start to think more broadly about DEI in our areas, if that's all right. And then one of the things, given that I am the zone resource chair for DEI, and this is still early days around this work, I would like to, sort of encourage a little bit of a dialogue at the end of the call, just to talk about, what folks think about DEI. What do you think are some of the things that are ways we can leverage it? What are some of the things that you think we should do first? What is sort of the top of mind perception of DEI? And that's part of this early discovery work that we're doing right now. I'm also going to be, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be heavily involved in this, but as the 7820 and 7815 come together next July to form a new district, there will be a DEI committee at that new zone, or at that district level. And so if there's anybody that's interested on this call today that wants to be part of that conversation, please reach out. And I think, Harvey, you have my information, so you feel free to share it after the call. And I'll send you the deck as well, so you can feel free to circulate the deck that I'm going to pull up that's actually going to go through the toolkit. And we're still sort of figuring out what that actually looks like in terms of what our focus is or how we're going to approach the work. So does that sound like an okay approach? We're okay with that? All right. So I will share my screen. Oops. Somebody needs to let me share my screen. That might be you, Harvey. Whoever's the host.
Okay, give that a try.
Awesome, thank you. So you are my lucky number 85. This is, I've done this 85 times. And I've done it across Canada, and I've done it on the top part of the US, because that is the composition of our zone. I've also presented this to a number of our local community organizations, and I have a presentation coming up with a university community, because they're really impressed by the toolkit, and they want to activate this conversation around systemic racism at the student level. So just give you sort of a sense of the width and the breadth of the roadshow, the virtual roadshow that I have going on with this particular presentation. So just to, one of the things that I like to do when I start my presentations is just to do a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I also acknowledge the significant contribution that the Black and African Nova Scotia communities have played in building this province and country. We're all treaty people. So one of the things that is coming up, of course, and in the conversations in these 85 presentations, is why Rotary? Why would we be the ones to actually start to have this conversation in a very focused way around systemic racism? And why now? Well, the answer to that question for me, and we're all going to have our own sort of personal way that we answer that question, is that I do feel, and I hold it very sincerely in my heart, that I am a person of action. And as a sort of global organization, I feel that we do have that power to actually make systemic changes. And so I do feel that this is a natural alignment with how we define ourselves as people of action. And why now? Because it is the right thing to do. And what initiated this work was a call out from the then District Governor, Louisa Horn, in response to the murder of George Floyd last May, around striking a task force around systemic racism, particularly focused on anti-Black racism. And there were a number of folks that came forward, and I have a slide that actually talks about the committee, but 10 people stayed with the task force and then undertook the work that was necessary to sort of figure out what we needed to do next.
He was ready, whether it was a meeting or not.
So
He was. He was ready.
No.
Right now, you can do exactly what you're doing tonight. You actually book a speaker to come in and you start the conversation. You create the space to listen to stories from individuals around you. You build your own level of awareness, and then you decide what you're going to do about it personally and collectively. In terms of understanding systemic racism, it really is a starting point. And this is what we wanted to do with this particular presentation and this particular toolkit, was that we wanted to create an opportunity for the conversation to start, both at the local level, but also at the leadership level. We also thought it was important, and I know that there's different sort of worldviews and perspectives around the definitions, but these were the ones that we thought were helpful around systemic racism and then anti-Black racism. So I won't read them, I'll leave them up for a second, but it was important just to have a common point of view, because we recognize that, you know, if we don't have them in there, then there's a conversation about, you know, does racism mean, you know, this particular situation or that particular situation? And what we wanted to get at was that it really is, you know, related to your own lived experience. But we wanted to sort of put it there as a slide, as a common reference point, so that we had that in terms of how we were conceptualizing systemic racism and anti-Black racism. We also wanted to highlight that this is really a journey, and it's not a one and done kind of thing, and that as we're going through this, oriented towards, you know, that ultimate sort of meaningful change, the individuals that are, you know, in your club or in your community or in your family or your friend set, they might be at different parts of this evolutionary journey, going from becoming an anti-racism or racist, sorry, as you sort of go through this various levels. And so you might see different behaviors. And so what we're suggesting with this schematic is that we're all oriented in the same direction, but we really want to approach it with some degree of compassion and awareness that, you know, we might not all be at the same place, but as long as we're all committed to change, that we will collectively move along this journey together. So just from a task force perspective, our approach and our commitment, we did, as I said, responded to a call from the district governor at the time. The task force was struck in June, around this time last year, and we met very intensively for the first 6 months. And we had representation from a number of clubs in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And one of the key things that we developed at the very beginning from a sort of a formation of our task force perspective is that we wanted to build our own awareness. So we invited guest speakers to come in and share their perspective, just so that we could collectively learn together. We did decide that the district needed a commitment statement. So we drafted one and released that in September. And then all of our work was oriented and anchored in that commitment statement. We also identified that there probably was some value in developing and then releasing a couple of conversation primer assets. So like the 4-way test comparison. So we did that in October. And then we also determined that the best approach was to create a high-level framework, which you'll see in the next slide, and then orient all of the tactics and strategies to that framework. So there were 10 members on the task force, and we did, it was a very close group, and we now have a speaker series that we are hosting every 2 months, so that we are continuing with our work. And then our next focus will be, as I said, our first focus was anti-Black racism. And then our next focus that we're going to activate in the spring is anti-Indigenous racism. So if there's, before the districts actually come together, if there's anybody on the call that is interested in being part of that conversation, you can reach out to me as well. We're not entirely sure how we're going to approach it. But we know that we did make a commitment to activate that conversation in the spring. So this is the mission statement that I had mentioned earlier that we thought was really important to essentially put out first and then anchor the rest of the work. Everyone should be able to live in a world where individual rights and basic human dignity are respected and guaranteed. Without exception, we should all be enabled to succeed as far as our potential allows. Rotary District 7820 is against all forms of discrimination, including racism. To fulfill our commitment, all of us must be active in promoting our collective and individual values of respect for equity, diversity, inclusion, and openness to change. So it's a very powerful statement, and it is aligned with a statement that was issued by Rotary International President in 2021. No place within Rotary for racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, classism, or ageism. So this is a very strong stand that we took as a district, but certainly that also is one that's echoed from the RI level and now certainly from the zone level. This was the four-way test of sort of an early asset that I mentioned. And as you can see, applying the systemic racism lens to the four-way test provides, you know, that clear illustration that racism does not align with our Rotary compass. This is the strategic framework that I mentioned. So we've identified that there's 4 segments. There is sort of a sequential relationship that's suggested, but you don't necessarily need to go through all 4 before you jump to action. There are some clubs that immediately activated and started to do things, but what we're suggesting is that perhaps as an individual and as sort of groups, that you start first with acknowledgement, understanding that there is a deep issue, and you know, making space for listening to that first voice and sort of creating that witness opportunity. The second section is around awareness, where you actually engage your leadership and your membership and your community to actually build your own and your collective awareness. And you could do this through doing what we did as a task force, bringing in special speakers, or perhaps looking for resources, or creating discussion forums. So there's a number of ways that you can actually work to build your awareness around systemic racism and anti-Black racism. The next thing we're suggesting is that you stop and reflect, both individually and collectively, and actually see, you know, if there's anything that could be improved or needs to be improved or needs to be adjusted. For me, particularly for my club, I'm also the local service chair. And this work actually changed the way I thought about our relationships with the community organizations that we supported, because in the past, we've historically supported, you know, the same sort of 5 or 6. And through this work and sort of raising my own level of awareness, I actually had a different conversation with the community than we have had in the past, where we actively asked, how can we support you, instead of assuming I knew what the answer was, or that we should continue to sort of support them in the way that we've done in the past. So for me personally, it actually changed the way that we design our community support plan, because we actually stopped and did that assessment, and also just sort of had that personal reflection about the way that we engaged our community around us. And then the last section is action. So once you've gone through the first 3, then, you know, we would encourage you to develop your own action plan. And it could be anything from a book club or a speaker series, or even, you know, every once in a while, I know some clubs are doing this, where they're actually having a systemic racism aspect that they integrate into their meeting rotations. So every 6 weeks, they actually bring forward a topic from a club perspective to discuss. So this is really something that, you know, whether you're an individual or a group, this is certainly something for you to think about, and you can certainly customize in whatever way you feel is appropriate. So this is the toolkit. And right now it is hosted on the district website, and we deliberately, when you go to the district website, you can actually see there's a bunch of hyperlinks right underneath the logo there that was designed specifically for this work. And we did that deliberately. You can also get it if you click on the icon and there's hyperlinks behind, but we deliberately put it underneath the icon because we wanted to be available to anybody from the community. We don't necessarily have to be a Rotarian to access this kit. We actually did it not only for Rotarians, but also for a bigger purpose. So we also thought when we were developing the toolkit, and it feels like there's a lot of materials, but we wanted to develop a number of different resources with an adult education sort of philosophy behind us developing all these different types of materials, because we consume information in different ways. So we wanted to make sure that we had multiple resources for individuals to access to spark conversations in their area. So we have the resource guide and an accompanying presentation. We have a discussion primer. We have a what can you do now infographic, a coaching reference sheet, because really it is about all stepping forward together, and there might be some peer coaching that's required. There's a conversation kit, because really this work and sort of advancing towards meaningful change is all about talking and conversation, and we certainly need to have some skills around that. We do have the anti-racism discussion vocabulary, which is also important to familiarize yourself with. And then we have 2 assessments that we developed, one for club and one for self. So in terms of what can you do now, I guess I've sort of already noted this. You can form a committee, have a look at your club, and ask your membership. And, where the club that I'm from, we're really quite diverse. We are now 73, and, we have, I think we're 49% women. We have 35% under 35. There's 6 languages that are spoken in our club. So, on the base of it, I thought we were doing a great job. There was one club member that I did reach out to and ask what her experience had been in the club, and her response kind of broke my heart a little bit, and it just illustrated to me that we have more work to do. When she said she didn't necessarily feel entirely comfortable being herself because she didn't necessarily see herself represented in the club. And there wasn't anybody that was particularly mean to her, but that it wasn't as necessarily representative as it should be. So that was a cold silver moment for me, where I had to sort of check my own biases about us doing really well. So it's really important just to sort of stop and reflect and ask people around you about their experience. You do want to join the conversation and continue to talk. And then, there's that getting to know each other, which is really important. So that's technically my last slide, just around our collective responsibility. And I'm more than happy to pull up any of the tools if you wanted me to walk through the toolkit or any of the other tools that I had listed there. If anybody's interested in seeing any of those, or if anybody has any questions right now, we could stop and do that.
I've got a question from Aaron Hansen,
Sure.
and it's how can we engage and attract people of different races, cultures, and socioeconomic status in places where diversity is lacking? Is there another way other than recruitment so we can represent and include all?
So what I would suggest, it's a really tough question, because you can't be welcoming and sort of, represent that diversity until you build a relationship with individuals and communities and ask. So I think it starts with the relationships first. And I think, this is work that we're doing at my club level for sure, in terms of how do we have different conversations with the community that we, that surrounds us. And what we're finding is that we're actually building relationships and building partnerships in a different way than we have in the past. And we're all, certainly leading with our hearts. We just need to follow with our heads about being very intentional with these conversations that we're having with community organizations. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
I just want to ask you something. Now you said we have to build relationships before we get them involved, right, with the Rotary. But when we take other members, say from the local community, right, we are not building a relationship. We just kind of put out a name at the Rotary, and after 3 readings and approval, they are able to join. So why is there a little bit of a difference when we are dealing with some other communities? Why do we have to build a relationship first and then get them involved?
Oh, no, I don't, no, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant to suggest. I think if there's an individual that wants to join a club, and if there's somebody who wants to, that's a friend of theirs that wants to bring them in, I don't think there's any additional work that has to be done to actually include that individual. I think, and what I'm seeing personally is that and even though we're a very diverse club, we could be even more vibrant than we are. And I think what part of what needs to happen for us is that we need to go and build a solid relationship with the Friendship Center, or with the Black Business Initiative, or with ISANS, so that we actually have these relationships with these organizations, so that we can actually say, well, you know, we have this network of amazing people, and we would love for you to join. And where we wouldn't necessarily perhaps have a natural connection. And, you know, not everybody has a friend that wants to bring them to Rotary. So we know that there are some cases where we have to do a little bit more work to actually build our level of awareness. So I'm sorry if I suggested that.
No. I'm just trying to kind of, understand the logic behind it, basically. But the other thing, we have in New Brunswick, as we do in all over Canada, different like groups that are formed, like, associations, like we have Indo Canada Association, so that is Indian Association. By the same token, we have Filipino Association, we have African, Bangladeshi, Pakistani. So maybe it would be a very good idea if some representatives from Rotary Club approach these associations and maybe do a little presentation about what Rotary does and how we function. So that way, maybe there will be some people in those associations that might be interested.
Yeah, that's an amazing idea, actually. That's a really good idea. Thank you.
I've got a question from John Karkner. I am a member of the District 7810 Indigenous Relations Committee. What are the similarities and differences between DEI and furthering the cause of Indigenous relations with the non-Indigenous segments of our society?
Wowzers.
That's a good one.
I don't know if I have an answer to that question, quite honestly. And just so, to put a finer point on I'm not a DEI expert. Where my zone of brilliance is bringing people together, bringing the right people together, and organizing the chaos a little bit to actually sort of achieve a tangible result. So in terms, I think that's part of the work that we need to do. And I don't know, honestly, if it is about differentiation or if it's about appreciation of what an accurate narrative is based on what the community story what they want to tell us. So I honestly, I don't really feel I have an answer for that question, which feels a little bit like a cop-out, so I apologize. But it's a really big answer that I don't know if we know enough yet about, what DEI looks like from a Rotary perspective, and then also a conversation that we have to have with the Indigenous community about, what is the relationship that they want to have and what do they want us to know. And I think it really is about, figuring that out. So I apologize if I didn't answer that.
I think first of all, John, and Jaren Babineau, I'm sorry. Oh God, I just got the wrong name. Jaren Robichaud, sorry. That's chairing that Indigenous Relations Committee. I have a feeling that those are a couple of people that probably for DEI, especially with 7815, that will have to be. I mean, there's so much, and there's so much discussion that has to be that we have to go through. It's going to take a long time to get all of this sorted out, but yeah, there's a lot of issues. I know from the point of view of the Florenceville Rotary Club, we do have a very diverse community, but we have a very not diverse club. And we recognize it, and and that's why we were making partnerships with the Multicultural Association, which, as Barb said, fell through. But it's something that needs to be addressed, and that's what makes Rotary great, is diversity. And I think that's where this is going. And I think, Lorianne, your work has been spectacular. It starts the discussion for sure. Let's see. Okay. I did have a comment from Tin Babineau. That's why I made that mistake, because I was thinking about Tin. We have done that with the Muslim Association in my club. It is a great way to build relationships. Oh, John said, I knew that was a tough one. Clearly, we still have plenty of work to do. Yep, absolutely agree. Any more questions out there? If you'd prefer to unmute and just go ahead,
okay.
voice, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just muted myself when the other speaker were speaking. Like, when we refer to racism, what happens is, like right now, there is kind of a wave where every organization, every, every groups, like, every group in government, at government level, we are all talking about racism so intensely. But what I feel is, like, resistance to multicultural sensitivity was often based on apprehension and discomfort about not understanding cultures rather than on prejudice. Like, this is something.
Point on Instagram. Somebody called me.
Oh,
Did somebody say something to me?
no, I think.
Okay, all right. So, like, I mean, when we are talking about racism, it's good that we are addressing that. And, but what I feel is, rather than emphasizing so much on racism, I'm also immigrant, but I came here in 1978. And I had to make my way through. I think when you start contributing in a positive way in the society, people do acknowledge that, people do respect that, and they accept you more easily. But when we talk about racism in such a strong way everywhere that you go, you're hearing this nowadays, like, then my personal feeling is the newcomers or the young students that are coming now, it will be so entrenched in their minds, that, oh yeah, this is a society where we are being discriminated. But honestly, like, I mean, I've lived here 42 years. And yes, of course, there are a few things like, that you feel, okay, am I being singled out or what? But that doesn't mean that everybody is a racist. So we have to, like, when we talk about racism, you have to encourage the newcomers, the new immigrants. Yes, if you have adapted to this country and if you want to be part of this country and flourish here, you have to kind of contribute positively. You have to mingle with the mainstream society. That is the only way you will be accepted. But when you draw those lines, okay, like, because I honestly feel that we are talking so much about racism, is that really going to be beneficial, or is it going to be, have a negative impact on the young people? So that was my viewpoint, like, maybe we have to kind of address this subject in such a way that, you're not hurting the feelings of the mainstream society here, and yet encouraging the people that, yes, there is a bit of racism, but we have to kind of, overcome that, and we have to kind of guide them to overcome that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And just in terms of context, this particular toolkit was in response to the surge in the States and the situation that was happening, and then the global response around. So this this particular toolkit is, I would say, I'm gonna fueled, but it certainly is in, you know, social justice was certainly one of the underlying tenets to sort of inform our thinking around this toolkit. And I think that the broader DEI conversation that we need to have, I think that there will be sort of activating conversations around, you know, how do we actually move towards change? But I hear you that this can be really friction filled, and some of my meetings have not gone great, quite honestly, because people have been, you know, a little bit upset with some of the conceptual sort of suggestion that, you know, everybody is sort of sitting in their own bias and perhaps might be a little bit racist in perhaps some of the assumptions that they have, and that doesn't sit well with folks. And really, I think what we were trying to get at with this toolkit and this conversation was the fact that we're just talking tonight means to me that it's a success. And that some of my conversations have been really hard because people got really, really upset with the suggestion that how can a Rotarian be a racist? Well, you know, not in an intentional, mean way, perhaps, but some of the judgments or some of the things that you don't think about or that you don't act on. So, you know, I hear you. Like it's hard. These are hard conversations to have. So thank you for your comment. So.
I have another question from Erin Hansen. Should we focus on inclusion as a way to mitigate systemic racism?
I think so. I certainly think so. And I think when you focus on inclusion, there still has to be tactics associated with that. If you do have to have sort of that defining parameters around what is the end result that we want to see. Some of the tactics that you might enlist or you might leverage still might be a conversation about racism. But it's absolutely, I think that the you know, inclusion certainly is something that feels more empowering if we were thinking about that sort of as sort of that overarching kind of goal that we're moving towards.
And John made a comment, sometimes we're unaware of our own biases.
Absolutely.
Yep. Anything anyone else would like to add? And as Lorianne said, moving into 7815, we've got just a little over a year left to put the district together, and one of the big factors is having an active DEI committee. And so say exactly what Lorianne said, if anybody's interested in being part of that, you certainly let us know, because we the more people the better, the more input the better, the different opinions. It's one of the most difficult ones to be working on. The zone, well, Rotary International in general is trying to come up with the same thing at the same time. So it's nice to know that we're all working together on this. But in particular with our district, we want to get started with a running start. And we're hoping that what we develop out of 7815 is a model for the rest of the Rotary world. So, and I know we've got the incredible brain power in the two districts that we're going to be merging. So I know that people are there. Another question, Marianne Bell, when approaching a community organization, for example, an association of immigrants, is it a good idea to say to them, we're trying to be a group that values diversity, equity, and inclusion, or is that awkward?
I think there's a number of different strategies. The way that I'm opening my conversation is that, we'd like to learn a little bit more about you. And then that just, is an open door to have that conversation instead of sort of perhaps immediately identifying that we already say that we're kind of deficient or that we've kind of dropped the ball a little bit. So just actively, reaching out and starting the conversations. I think by saying, we want to learn a little bit more about what you do in the community. And, we feel perhaps, and the other half of that conversation that we share is that we feel that there might be an opportunity for partnership. And so, it just kind of opens the door. And then you immediately give the impression, of course, that, you value the organization, because you're starting with that, that from that position, that positive position. So, it all depends on, you might have a previous relationship where somebody who has a connection with the organization, and you can have sort of a little bit more of a frank conversation. But I think it's also, getting to know your community. One of the things that we're doing for our club is that, and this is unrelated to racism particularly, but we do a lot of support with community organizations around food insecurity, and we're not really sure who's doing what in the community. We actually know what we're doing. We know what organizations and how we're supporting the different projects. But we actually went out and started to do a community consultation and a needs assessment. But not necessarily sort of generating the data just by basically what we could find online, but we generated the information through conversations. So, our plan looks, as I said, very different than it has a couple of years ago, just informed by those conversations. And we're now acting a little bit of a coordination hub. And so we are collaboratively working with some of the organizations to amplify our impact, our collective impact around food insecurity. So I think honestly, it's just starting the conversation. And one of the things that, and I'm in what my daughter says in my big girl job, I actually do change with organizations. So I'm used to not only helping folks navigate friction, but I'm also used to creating friction to actually shake people out of sort of a mindset that might be holding them back. So this is going out and having sort of very uncomfortable conversations or making myself vulnerable. It's not unfamiliar to me, but it's difficult. It's difficult to do that. It's difficult to open a conversation with, I don't know. And it's also difficult to receive a communication or a message from somebody says, well, I actually really don't feel welcomed in your group. And it's hard to hear that, but we need to sort of create that space of safety that we can start to generate those conversations, because how are we going to learn otherwise?
Martin made a comment. We approached the local multicultural association and had a speed networking event, which was really successful.
That's an awesome idea.
Yeah. And Marianne, thank you for I said it was a very helpful answer. I'll make my own personal experience with how I was raised. I had a father, I'm Jewish, and I had a father that was extremely racist against Arab people and Muslims, and taught basically that they were the enemy. And it has taken a lot for me to be able to shake that. And that's a really good example of systemic racism, because I was bred into it basically. And it's a very difficult from the point of view of the struggle that the Jews and Muslims have been through to get over that kind of racism. But I work at it every day, and it is, I don't consider myself a racist, but in the back of my head, I've always got that lesson that I learned from, being a little boy, was, that was, if you're Jewish, that's the way you had to be.
For me personally, one of the things that certainly my experience is, starting with the task force. And one of the things that happened, at least through my perspective, was, I write a lot for my work. And there was a series of essays that I had written and that I was going to issue. And as I'm having these conversations with the other members of the task force, and they're sharing their stories, And, obviously, we're raised in different families and obviously in some cases, different cultures. And what I didn't fully appreciate is, it didn't occur to me, well, I mean, this is the nature of my work, but it didn't occur to me that I wouldn't release them, or it didn't occur, like that was just part of, so the whole concept of my privilege and, that the family that I was raised in and the opportunities that I've been offered and my whole worldview is just so incredibly, different, obviously, than some of the experiences of the members of the task force when they were sharing some of the things that they've gone through. And quite honestly, it paralyzed me for about 3 months in terms of me publicizing anything, just because I felt that I just didn't have a right to actually take up any space on the stage anymore. And I had to have some really good, a couple of colleagues of mine and 2 very, very strong African Canadian women told me to smarten up. So I figured it out, but just in terms of like, you have to go through this in terms of what this means for you and then what you're willing to do or act. But part of it is having that personal reflection on what am I doing? What are my biases? Is there something that I need to adjust or adapt or change myself to align with my personal values and my compass around being an advocate to stop racism? So it was an interesting experience for me, because I certainly know that I feel fortunate, but I didn't think about myself in that context until I've been part of this group. So it's certainly something that, again, going back to that slide, it is an individual journey, but I think that we're all collectively on this journey together, and I think these are important conversations to have.
Erin has a question. Have you ever been told why or what has made people feel unwelcome?
In terms of, I was just speaking with that one individual from our club perspective, and she was a young person of color, so it was more of an age thing, I think she said, and not necessarily so much of a cultural element. But I think for some of the individuals in the presentations that I've made, it has been about sort of representation in the clubs, and them actually, not seeing themselves represented or not seeing other people that look like them, which is really important. And, just in terms of some of the ways that the clubs conducted themselves, they just felt that it wasn't, very inviting, or that they didn't feel included. And so, I think it was just an important moment. They didn't necessarily get into too much detail about why they didn't necessarily feel welcomed in the clubs, but it was more of a sort of business as usual without a fuller appreciation of diversity.
This is a great comment from Andrew Bryan. One unconscious bias I was confronted with by my father, who is a university administrator educator. What does your mind think of when I say international student? And would you think that your first idea would be a white American because they're international students in Canada? I would say probably you wouldn't think that way, would you?
No, it's interesting when you go through some of those exercises where you don't realize, and it's, for the most part, it's not coming from a nasty place, but we don't realize that we sort of have those underlying biases that does affect the way that we see the world. And in some cases, I think we should stop and question, is that really, affecting, the way that I see things or affecting my behavior?
And I've got a comment from Ginny Joles. Ginny is one of our District 7810 past district governors, and she was also my travel partner on a project we did together in Guatemala. I remind you that Rotary used to be a good old white boys club, which I hate to admit was when I started Rotary. I was the first, that's me talking, by the way. I was the first female in my club. It was uncomfortable. You have to hang in there. Change is not easy, but well worth being patient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, when I make this presentation externally, I mean, one of the things, and it sounds like I'm being really hard on Rotary, but one of the things that I say that this was an organization started by middle-aged white dudes. And the fact that we're embracing this as a key priority now shows you the depth of our resiliency and our commitment to change. So if Rotary can make this shift and this pivot, then any organization can do it.
Yep. So if anyone else has any other questions, we're getting close to the end of our hour, I guess. I'll let Barb come back on and make some closing remarks, but I want to thank you so much, Lorianne, for taking our invitation.
Yes, thank you, Lorianne. It's Barb back on. And I would like to say that we're very proud to be your 85th presentation group. This has been wonderful. I went on and looked at your toolkit earlier today, and I want to thank you and your task force members for all the work that you've done in putting that together. It's excellent. I especially read over the vocabulary. I think we need to know the words when we're having these conversations, and because words do matter very, very much. I've been frantically writing things down, and you've made some excellent comments. These are hard conversations to have with people, but I like when you said we would like to learn a little bit more about you. And we're just starting to build relationships. I mentioned food when I started. We know that food is always a great way to get people together, and especially if it's from another culture or whatever. And I also want to thank all the participants for your excellent questions and comments. This has been great. And our thunderstorm has passed, so that's a great thing too. And again, thank you, Lorianne.
No, you've been great.
Thank you, Harvey.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and have a great night.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.